Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. Running Story by Murky Rip. I'm going to start my story by saying that you should always be careful when running, even if it is in a popular place, or even if you have run the trail a dozen times. It's always important to be aware of your surroundings. When I was in high school, I was an active runner. I would run every day after school, which allowed me to clear my head or just to get some clarity on things I was thinking about. I had run track on and off since middle school, so I could keep a good pace while running distance, and even could run a pretty decent mile. This happened when I was a senior in high school, so there was a lot on my mind. Things like which college I was going to attend, or which colleges I could even get into, etc. Everything was changing pretty fast, and the amount of stress I had from school had finally gotten to me. So I had decided that I would go running in a park after school one day, just to give myself some time to think. The park was a pretty popular place. It had some really great trails, and it wasn't far off from my house, so I ran there pretty often. I always felt safe while running in the park, as I saw lots of people I knew, and often always saw someone on the trails. There were some undeveloped areas where you could run for some good scenic views, where you could sometimes see deer and other animals, too. When I got to the park, there were people there, but it wasn't as busy as usual, and that didn't bother me, as I had a lot on my mind and needed that time to run and just think. I did all of the things I usually did, like stretch, and got ready to enter the woods. I put my headphones in, and the second I did, I blurred everything else out. I had started up my run with a nice light jog and passed some people and smiled like normal, until there was a man who greeted me with a smile that was extremely unsettling. If I had to describe it, I would say imagine someone looking at you, and they smiled with no teeth while bringing their eyes up like in the movie Smile. It was creepy, but I just nodded to him and waved like I normally would. I tried not to pay too much attention to the man and just kept running, as it was at a public park and it wasn't unusual to see other people. I had gone maybe a few laps around the common park area and kept passing the man in the same area, which struck me as weird, as I had run laps, and not little ones either. I mean, these laps took 5 to 8 minutes. But every time I would pass him, I would politely nod and just keep running. After a while, though, I started to think more and more about the situation. I began wondering why the man hadn't moved much from the original area that I'd seen him in. At that point, I started seeing less and less other people on the main trails, and it was getting later in the afternoon. The sun was covering the clouds, and although it hadn't set, it was getting darker and kind of gloomy, as if a storm were coming. It was late April, so it was hot and rainy pretty frequently. I decided that I would run just a bit longer until it started to rain, and then I would head back to my car. I ran past the main parking lot and noticed that my car was the only car parked in the lot. So now I knew I was alone, and I figured everyone knew the rain was coming and just decided to leave. I ran toward the entrance and re-entered the running paths, passing the original place I had seen the man, and he was gone. I slowed down to catch my breath and walked slightly for a few minutes, deeper and deeper into the trail. I was just gathering my thoughts when the feeling of being watched overtook me. I took my headphones out, and when I did, the park was silent. I mean, scary silent. You couldn't hear trees blowing in the wind or any of the cars from the main road. I could only hear the sound of my breath and the music blasting from my headphones. I looked around and didn't notice anything, so I kept walking. But this time I was remaining vigilant, as I couldn't shake this feeling that I was being watched. As I was walking, I had my head down, and when I brought it up, I noticed the man from earlier walking in my direction. Except this time, he wasn't smiling. He looked agitated, so I didn't even bother to smile or wave. I kept my head down, but I did notice that he was wearing jeans, boots, and a long-sleeve shirt. It was something that I hadn't noticed earlier. It wasn't unusual for someone to be wearing that, but it was in the low 80s and pretty humid from rain days prior, so I knew that this guy had to be hot. I kept walking for a minute, hoping that I was in the clear, and when I made it maybe another 20 feet, I turned around to see where he had gone, and to my surprise, he turned around also, walking in my direction. I picked up my pace a little and started jogging, leaving my headphones out this time. Every step I took, I heard more steps behind me. I glanced back and noticed the man was jogging as well, and I thought to myself, jogging in jeans, boots, and a long-sleeve shirt? I was so deep into the trail, though, that I was equidistant to both the start and finish, and if I kept going, I would loop around in my car without having to turn around. But every step took me deeper and deeper into the woods and further away from the main road. And although it sounds dumb, I knew I couldn't have run past the man if he had planned on doing something, and that I didn't want to find out. I had close to a mile left on the trail, and every time I would pick up the pace, so would he. I kept hoping that he would stop to take a breath, but he never did. I tried to rationalize it, but I couldn't, especially since every time I picked up the pace, he was quick to as well. The area was much darker now, and the rain had started pouring. I was drenched, and as I took a look back, the man was even closer than before. He was gaining on me, and I knew that I had to make a fast decision, so I went for it in hopes that if he was following me, he couldn't calculate my next move. I was approaching a scenic dip off the trail that had been overgrown and covered by leaves and sticks leading downward on a slope like a tall hill. People had stopped running down it now because of how steep it was, but it did cut right down the main loop, saving probably a third of the remainder of my run. At that point, the only people who really knew about it were people who had run it before it became overgrown. I picked up my pace as fast as I could, running straight forward on the main path, and covered my face with my arms, cutting a sharp left running through the twigs, vines, and leaves. I heard an audible gasp, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. I ran down the hill as fast as I could, hoping that I had made the right decision, and too afraid to look back until I reached the bottom of the hill. I'd put a good distance between us. When I turned around for the last time, there he was, standing at the top of the hill looking down at me, breathing heavily and looking annoyed and angry, like he was on the verge of a psychotic break. He was breathing heavily, covered in rain, and just staring at me with nothing but anger. I didn't stick around. I ran as fast as I could toward my car, hoping that when I got to it, the story would end there. But when I approached my car, I quickly jumped into it and pulled out of the parking lot as fast as I could. I looked in the rear-view mirror and noticed the man on the edge of the woods staring, and it immediately sent chills down my spine, as there were no other cars in the parking lot. I was shaking the whole car ride home and was too afraid to tell my parents, because if they knew, they wouldn't let me run there again, and that was my only form of solitude. I laid in bed all night in fear, thinking about his unsettling smile and how creepy that guy was. I thought about how I should have known something was wrong sooner. I finally fell asleep after replaying all of the scenarios in my head, and I was woken up at 3 a.m. by my stepdad, who had just gotten home from work. I heard him enter the house in a panic, screaming for me, and when I sat up, he came into my room asking if I was okay, and when I asked why, he pointed outside. I quickly went outside to see my car door had been opened, and my car had been gone through, seats slashed, and had a busted back window. I was confused, as nothing had been stolen. This had been done just to destroy my car. It was strange. I started thinking about who would do something like that and why. I mean, we lived in a secluded area with only 2 neighbors, and they lived far enough from us to allow us to be loud and have gatherings, but close enough to run to in case of an emergency, so no one had heard anything. Aside from the glass and cut seats, the only thing sitting on my seat was my registration. It suddenly dawned on me that when I had run to my car earlier that day, I jumped straight in and took off. I'd never unlocked my car. It was older, so it had to be manually locked and unlocked with a key. But I didn't unlock it. I knew it had to be the man from earlier. He must have looked at the registration and gotten my name and address from it. I moved to college shortly after this, and my family sold that house when I was in college. But it still makes me wonder what else that guy would have done if he would have gotten closer to me, or even worse, broken into my house. Strange Guy at Work by Immortal Igor. I'd like to preface this by saying, yes, I still do work at this location, and yes, we still do occasionally get weird people coming in. But anyway, on with the story. It was my 2nd or 3rd month working night audit for this hotel in my area, and I had just gotten done running the financial audit when I heard the front doors opening. Our desk is relatively tall, and I was sitting on a chair, so I wasn't able to see who walked in. I stood up fully, ready for either an after-the-end-of-the-day check-in or a walk-in, but surprisingly, it was neither. It was some homeless-looking guy, with long, greasy gray hair wearing an old flannel. He was just standing in the lobby near the door, just looking at me. After a few moments, I asked him if he was a guest or if there was something he needed help with. He didn't say anything, and still just stood there looking at me. I began to feel uncomfortable, so I called my security guy. I'll call him James for the sake of privacy. I asked James to come to the front desk, and he responded saying that he was on the way. It took him a minute or so, as he had come from the 4th floor maintenance closet, which was on the other end of the hotel. As soon as I heard the lobby elevator descending, the homeless guy turned and walked out of the hotel. Finally, James showed up and asked what was wrong. I told him about the guy who'd come in, and about how he had just stared at me until he heard the elevator. James told me he would take a walk around and see if he could spot the guy, as we have a strict no trespassing policy, and we had to be sure that the guy left the property. It took about 20 minutes, but he eventually returned to the desk and informed me that he didn't see the guy, but that it would be good to check the security cameras so that if he did come back, we would recognize him. So this is where it gets kind of weird. We stepped into the back office where we have the monitors, and we rewound the footage to take a look at the guy, but only when we got to the point in the footage where the doors opened. It looked like no one walked in. We could clearly see the door open, and I stood up to talk to a guy, but he wasn't in the footage at all. Now, keep in mind, I work in a brightly lit lobby all night, so this was certainly odd, and it freaked me out more than a bit. I've heard a lot of stories of homeless people who have been found dead in our area, and even stories about deaths in my hotel, but I don't know if they're actually true or not. Needless to say, James stayed close to the lobby for the rest of the night, as I was really freaked out. It's been a while since then, and I haven't seen that homeless guy since, although plenty of other creepy things have happened, mostly in our back office, but those are stories for another day. I still wonder if what I saw was just a hallucination, or if I actually did see someone or something that night. Stalker by Dove. At the time of this, my family and I lived in Liverpool, in the northwest of England, in the early 2000s. Where we're from has always been notorious for its substance abuse problems, and being one of the more deprived areas in the country. I'm the youngest of four, and all my siblings, by the time I was in high school, were already starting their own families. So it was just me and my mom at home. She worked as a nurse and was sometimes assigned night shifts, so I was often left alone apart from the neighbors checking in every once in a while. And honestly, I didn't mind. While my mom worked, I'd complete simple household tasks like cleaning and putting the washing on the line outside. We didn't have a back garden. We had a garden on the front of the house. In the summer, I'd leave the front door open so I could go in and out easier and to let some fresh air into the house, which wasn't uncommon on the estate, as most had kids which would be running in and out of each other's houses all day. I started noticing that some of my clothes were going missing off the line, though, particularly underwear. But I just shrugged it off as the wind blowing it off, or some kid's idea of a joke. But then it started happening every time there was washing out, even when no kids were outside playing. We didn't own a dryer, so there was no other option but to put the clothes outside to dry, and more items went missing. Then more disturbing things started happening, such as me going upstairs and returning to the front door with it being wide open when I knew I had left it closed. Or sometimes the entire washing line had been pulled down, with only certain items being taken from the pile. I'd also find hand smudges on the windows, and that I always convinced myself were just from me opening and closing them. But deep down I knew it wasn't real. I thought I was just being paranoid, but I was still scared and didn't want to be alone, especially at night, as my imagination got the better of me. So I explained to my brother about the strange things I'd been noticing, and I asked him if he could pick me up and take me to his house for the night. The next morning, my brother got a call from my mom asking if I was with him, and to return home to clean up the mess that I'd left. My brother came with me so he could explain to my mom what had happened. He also knew that she was anxious and stressed out from her long shifts and not be lenient on me for leaving a mess. Once we got home, I noticed there were dirty footprints throughout the house which were definitely too big to be mine or my mom's, and they certainly weren't there when I'd left. My mom was pacing around the living room in a huff, pointing and shouting about pillows being thrown around and glasses and plates being left lying around unwashed. I had my brother's word to back me up that it had definitely not been left that way when he had picked me up. But she was confused as to who else would have made the mess since I was the last person to be home. She asked me to clean up as she was going to bed and to make sure everything was tidy before she woke up. When she reached the top of the stairs, she started calling my brother's name. Every door upstairs had been opened, and every room had been rifled through. Both mine and my mom's underwear drawers had been flung open, and there were clothes all over the floor. Both beds had been untidy as if someone had slept in them, and there were cigarette butts flicked onto the floor. It was obvious that someone else had been in the house, and it seemed like they'd made themselves right at home. My brother sent me and my mom downstairs to phone the police as he checked the rest of the house. He noticed the bathroom light on and noticed that whoever had been there had run themselves a bath, which they had forgotten to drain and left a ring around the tub. Gross. Whoever it was had also made themselves a cup of tea, and resting on the toilet were multiple pairs of my mom's underwear, which had all been soiled by whoever this person was. And that was at the point my brother had to leave the bathroom and wait for the police. When they finally came, the police told us it was most likely a homeless person or someone on drugs who just wanted a bed to sleep in for the night, since nothing was actually taken, including a ring on my mom's dresser, which was clearly in sight. They said there was nothing much they could do other than suggest we make sure all the windows and doors remain locked. After that, I wasn't allowed to stay home alone for a night anymore, just in case something similar were to happen again. But nothing ever did, apart from underwear occasionally still going missing off the line. I'm not sure if this was a stalker situation, or the police were right, that it was just a coincidence. I don't really care, because it still freaks me out. Cult Trap by the Leviathan. This isn't my story, it's my uncle's story. He told it to me a few days ago since we were sharing stories and experiences with each other. I asked him eventually about what was the creepiest and scariest thing that had ever happened to him. What I'm about to share here is his story. It's the weirdest and most disturbing thing that my uncle ever experienced. The story takes place back in the late 90s when my uncle was attending college at Sac State University at the time. During his time there, he would often walk around the campus to get his steps in for the day. On other days, he would sit underneath a tree or on the tables at the outdoor dining area to chat with his friends or finish up schoolwork. One day, while he was sitting under one of those trees doing work, this is when it happened. My uncle was just sitting there minding his own business when he saw someone walking towards him from his peripheral vision. He didn't think much of it at first, as he thought it was someone just walking past him, but then he noticed that the person was much closer to him, maybe about 15 feet away. He heard a woman's voice say hello, in which he turned around to see who it was. To this day, he says when he looked at her, she was probably one of the most drop-dead gorgeous women he'd ever seen. He described her vibrant blue eyes, long flowing blonde hair. He described her pretty dark green dress, and overall, he said, she had a siren-like beauty to her. He continued staring at her in awe and confusion for a minute, until he found his voice. He asked her if she needed any help with anything, and she replied that yes, that she wanted to just talk with him. My uncle was single at the time, and he saw no harm in talking to a girl, but he did say he felt something was off with her, but he couldn't exactly tell what it was. He decided to talk to her, but just be cautious. He asked her for her name, and she replied, Kelly. So my uncle also asked Kelly what she wanted to talk about, and she replied that she thought he was cute and wanted to hang out with him if he didn't mind. My uncle says he just kind of nervously agreed, and they continued to talk. My uncle said that, surprisingly, they had pretty good chemistry, and they shared a lot in common when they were hanging out together. Kelly asked my uncle if he wanted to hang out with her again, and he responded with a yes, sure. My uncle asked her if it would be all right if they hung out at a mall, and she happily agreed to that. And she gave him a hug and said that she couldn't wait to hang out with him again. So fast forward a few days later. My uncle went to the mall and saw Kelly was waiting for him there. They spent a few hours at the mall and everything was going smoothly, no problems. My uncle and this Kelly continued to hang out with no problems for another 3 weeks. And during one of their times when they were together, Kelly asked him if he would be interested in joining a special underground club that she was in. My uncle, of course, asked her what that was all about and where it was. Kelly explained that it was a friendship club, and it was about getting closer with your friends and building deeper bonds through fun activities. My uncle was intrigued, but wanted more info on what kind of activities she was talking about. She said she didn't want to tell him as it would ruin the surprise she had for him. So he asked her when the next club meeting was, and she replied that it was going to be a few days from then. She gave him an address and said that she just couldn't wait to see him there. So my uncle went home and looked up the address that night, and saw that it was in kind of a sketchy part of downtown. So now I'll skip ahead to the day of this club meeting. My uncle said he made his way to the downtown area and found the place where this supposed meeting was going to be held, but immediately got bad vibes. The address that he was supposed to go to for this meeting was an old, decrepit, run-down building that looked like it hadn't been used in years. He knocked on the door, and a man wearing a dark blue robe answered it. My uncle said, "Hi, I'm here for the meeting," and then asked if Kelly was there. He said the man gave him an odd look and seemed to be studying him for a minute, but then said, "Come on in," and that Kelly would be there soon. Upon entering the building, my uncle told me that it was rather nice on the inside, just a little dimly lit. He said there were these weird lights on the wall and that there were 5 other people in the room wearing the same dark blue robes. My uncle looked around and noticed a long corridor with a row of weird lamps on both sides. The corridor, he said, seemed to stretch on for quite a bit, until he noticed that it seemed to be going down. The robed man told my uncle to follow him and that the meeting would start soon once everything was settled. So the robed guy led him to the end of this corridor, which led down a short flight of stairs, and at the bottom of the stairs there was a small path that led to an old wooden door. My uncle said that the path that led to the door was practically pitch black. At that point, my uncle contemplated turning around and walking away, but something told him not to. They went downstairs and through that door, which led to another corridor with the same weird lamps. My uncle remembered saying how this corridor had so many doors along with many turns that he felt like he was walking through a maze of some sort. The 2 of them stopped at one of the doors, which the man opened, and told my uncle to step in. My uncle peeked his head into the room and felt his heart skip a beat when he saw what was in there. He said the room was empty, except for an old wooden chair sitting dead center in the room, along with a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling that barely lit things up. The robed man told my uncle to have a seat and to wait for about 10 or 15 minutes and that someone would come and get him and that Kelly should also be arriving at the same time. My uncle reluctantly stepped in and then went to sit on that chair, but the door closed behind him and the man said that he'd be right back. My uncle got up from the chair and decided to explore the room to see if he could figure out what was going on, and he was looking around till he noticed something on one of the walls. He looked and thought it was either some random stain or drawing, until he realized it wasn't. The closer he got to it, the more he saw that someone had painted something on the wall with black paint. He looked at it more carefully, and then felt the blood in his veins run cold when he saw what it was. There on the wall was a pentagram symbol that someone had made with what appeared to be dried blood. At that point, my uncle had seen enough and knew he had to get out of there immediately. He went and opened the door carefully and as quietly as he could and began to quickly make his way out. While navigating the corridors, he heard a very loud and frantic pounding from one of the doors. He stopped momentarily to see if it was anyone that needed help, but there was no yelling, screaming, or any cries for help. He wanted to investigate, but his gut told him to just ignore it and to get out of there. He eventually found the main door, went through it, up the stairs, and then sprinted for the exterior door. Oddly enough, the 5 other robed men he saw earlier weren't there, so he was relieved that he didn't have to deal with them, since he wouldn't have known what he would have done at that moment had they been there. During the rest of his time at college, my uncle never saw or heard from Kelly again, or whatever her real name was. My uncle never called the cops and regrets it, as he'll never know if those guys got caught. I mean, who were those people, really? And what were they going to do with him? My uncle firmly believes that he was either going to be initiated, or sacrificed maybe, by some blood or satanic cult. My uncle believes that Kelly was just used as a lure in order to gain trust and to lower anyone's guard, including my uncle's. After that experience, he didn't go downtown for a very long time, out of fear of being spotted by one of the cult members. My uncle is forever grateful that he was fortunate enough to escape, as he doesn't know, and shudders at the thought of what might have happened to him if he had stuck around and didn't escape. My Father by Silly Ad. Uncle Josh note. Trigger warning on this one. It involves sexual assault, and I went back and forth with the author of this story. They're more concerned about getting the story out there as kind of a warning for others who might be going through something similar and to get help. I know this story sounds crazy, but let's get some background first. I'm 16, turning 17 this year, and this all happened about 3 years ago. My father had always been a weird man, and unfortunately had spent years sexually assaulting me, between the ages of 6 to 11. He was physically and emotionally abusive towards me and my mother, too, though the abuse was mostly directed towards me, and the sexual parts only ever happened to me. My oldest sister had never liked my father. I have 6 siblings, by the way, though I've never lived with any of them. I've never spoken to 4 of them. We shared the same mom, but not the dad. I have 2 sisters on my mom's side, and there's a huge age gap between me and them, the oldest one being 30. My mom has never really had a great relationship with my oldest sister. My oldest sister has always been kind of an aggressive person. Constantly slamming doors, punching, kicking, screaming, breaking things, you name it. But as I stated previously, she never liked my bio dad for understandable reasons. Being mean to my mother was one of these reasons. She didn't know about anything that happened to me, though. When I was around 10 years old, my sister finally lost her shit and showed up to our apartment and threw my father out of it, and I was absolutely crushed. For context, my father had been manipulating me for years, telling me that what was going on was normal and that all fathers did it. So of course I believed that he wasn't doing anything wrong. A few months after he left the apartment, I started getting weird phone calls from strange men, asking about me and telling me that they had seen my pictures. Of course, I had no idea what kind of pictures they were talking about. I wasn't even on social media. But I didn't tell my mom, thinking that they probably just had the wrong number. But the calls were getting more and more frequent, and when I turned 11, I finally understood what kinds of pictures those men were talking about. I remember one specific call. I was in my tween girl bedroom, pink fluffy pillows, fluffy blankets, and so on. Someone called and I picked up the phone, not recognizing the number. "Hello, is this so-and-so?" They knew my real name. So I said, "Yes, hi, who is this?" Long story short, I finally snapped and asked what pictures and where he had found them. I hadn't taken a nude ever. And I remember the man telling me that he had found them on some weird website, along with my phone number and my age. And there were multiple pictures, multiple pages, and that wasn't the only site where my pictures were. At that point in time, my school was in the middle of a field, a 20-minute walk. This specific situation that I'm going to talk about happened during December, right before my Christmas break. It was dark and quite early in the morning. I saw a figure standing under a streetlight, and I shrugged it off, looking away before looking back. When I did look back, the figure was gone, so I just kept walking. This happened every morning for months. I missed school one day, the day we were going on a field trip. Well, it was more of a walk to someplace, and I can't remember. But when I showed up the next day, my teachers pulled me to the side and asked if I had planned to meet my father during the field trip, and I shook my head and said no. Apparently, he had stood by on some location on this walk and waited for me. He told my teachers that he was going to pull me out of the field trip and I was going to spend the rest of the day with him. And then I snapped. I told my school counselor about the fact that my father had been abusing me and my mom. I still didn't know the sexual stuff was bad, but my counselor made a report to CPS, and then it was really over. We had to move into a house with hidden identities and restraining orders, but my father kept texting me. The thing that will always give me the chills is that on the last day of our stay in the safe house, I saw my dad. He was standing by a tree, just standing there, observing me. And all I can say at this point is, yeah, Dad, it's over. Let's not meet now or even in the afterlife. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like me to narrate, email it to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you're catching this episode on YouTube and you like what you've heard, please give the video a thumbs up. Maybe even leave a comment below and let me know what you thought of the stories. And possibly subscribe if you haven't already. Maybe even tell a friend. All that stuff really helps the algorithm, and I sure would appreciate it. Follow me on social media, links to that are in the description. And if you'd like to take your support of what I'm doing a step further, find a link to my Patreon page, or consider purchasing some Uncle Josh and Campfire Crew merchandise. A link to my storefront at tpublic.com is down there too. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.